What is going on, pals? Welcome back to yet again another video. For today, we're going to be talking about Luminosity Gaming. They've officially released 3 of their players and picked up 3 more. So if you're curious to see what happened, which players they did pick up, which were actually Slat, Classic, and Octane, if you want to see me kind of go more in depth on that new team, Rise's previous history of being together, because of course they kind of split apart. Looney's now in Rise Nation looking for 3 new players. There's going to be a link in the description or as well an annotation on the screen right now where you guys can go and watch that if you are interested. But today we're going to be talking about Luminosity, not really talking about the new 3 pickups. I'm just going to reference it here and there, but I'm not going to be talking about how I think they're going to do. That's all in the previous video, and I referenced in the previous video that today, in this video, we're going to be talking about Luminosity. What was the team like? Maybe some of the issues that they were having. A lot of the problems that maybe they had that kind of led to this team wanting to split apart. And of course, if you guys are interested, I will be having a link also down in the description to an article that LG ended up tweeting out, because just really 30-45 minutes after Rise Nation announced that 3 of their players were going to be gone, LG announced that they were going to be picking them up. So it's kind of like a very, very quick process. You've got to imagine that was probably maybe in the back of LG's minds when they realized those players were being dropped, or maybe the reason why they left is because they knew they had a different opportunity on a separate team, which I think is most likely the likeliest one. So this full roster, of course, containing the likes of Saints, containing the likes of Nameless and StuDyy and SpaceLy, kind of came together heading into MLG Anaheim 2016 after losing John to Team Envious, and that was like the main duo. They kind of had a lot of problems. Why? Because John and also Saints were really the main slayers for the roster. There was really no one else who kind of keep up, with the likes of them, essentially, because it was also Replays and I believe SpaceLy at the time who really just couldn't keep that load up. They were both previously known as objective players. The roster was just kind of awkwardly set up together. And then they, had Replays on the team for a while, but he was kind of like an iffy, like would he be on the team, would he not be on the team? Then they put on TP for a short time, or he was running an AR. It was just a very, very awkward team. They even had Assault on the roster for a short time as well. It was like they had 3 ARs and 1 sub, and in reality, it's basically the opposite for most maps, unless you're playing like Infection Uplink or something like that. So they didn't really have the best setup for a team. You could see that there were a lot of issues with the roster kind of coming out, but they ended up obviously acquiring players like StuDyy, acquiring players like Nameless as well, and seemed to actually be a pretty decent team in reality, because whenever they were picking up Nameless, it was the question of how is he going to perform. A lot of people were thinking that the reason why Complexity at the time was struggling so much was that Nameless was the problem with the team. He was the captain, but he wasn't the best player. He really wasn't doing what people thought was his potential. That really wasn't the case at all. It seemed that he was definitely seeming to improve his KD. Basically, everything was rising for him. He seemed to be on a fresh new start. That's exactly, apparently, what he needed. So heading into their first event, like I said, MLG Anaheim 2016, they actually ended up placing top 6, but also had a very, very close series versus Optic Gaming, where StuDyy absolutely went off, and later down in the losers bracket, they ended up knocking Envious out of the tournament. Basically, almost beat Optic Gaming, and then you do take out Envious in the long run. It's a pretty decent tournament. I mean, you have to admit, that's a pretty decent start for the guys of LG after just one tournament kind of being together. So that, to me, was their best event. That was like the best moment that they've ever had as a team. Like I said, StuDyy was doing his absolute best. Like, they were all doing well, but StuDyy was by far leading the way, full on, like heads and shoulders above his teammates, just doing everything he possibly could. And ever since then, I never saw, in some ways, a similar LG against a number of different teams. Because I feel like at this tournament, they were playing consistent against everyone. But it only seemed that later on down the line, they would only play their very, very best against the top teams, being Optic Gaming, being Envious, so on and so forth. I think the reason why they maybe had a strong tournament or a very good start was obviously due to the fact that their chemistry. You think of these guys together, they're all very close friends. And you also got to think of the previous history between both StuDyy and Nameless, playing on Team Envious back in Ghost, being the runners-up at Call of Duty Championships back in Ghost as well. A very, very solid group of guys. And Nameless by far, Nameless and StuDyy were by far like brothers. It was like literally, I have never seen 2 players connect that well for a very short time. And the way that they kind of bonded together, I was like, this team could actually work. Like Luminosity Gaming could be a top team in the game. People were already starting to put them in their top 4, top 5 list in Call of Duty at the time. And it's kind of hard to kind of put that into perspective, because on a roster first forms, is it just beginner's luck? Is it just they, had really good matchups at a certain tournament? It's hard to tell. But as time would go on, they'd have some, placements here and there. They were narrowly able to place in top 8 into the regular seasons, which means they were able to go to playoffs, where they later placed top 4, which isn't bad at all. But when you're in a list of like 8 teams, you might be thinking, well, that's not really that impressive. But in that run, they actually were able to take out Optic Gaming in a Game 7, however, lost to DT the next series later to be placed in the grand final. So essentially, they go up against Optic Gaming, which many people are obviously very, very hyped about. This series goes all the way down to Game 7. This is super, super hyped series, because obviously why? Because Luminosity had taken them to a very close 3-1 back in Anaheim. and LG is able to close it out. Everyone's thinking, is LG like literally a top team? Like, are they going to be like the Optic Slayers? Like, what is happening at this point? And they ended up losing against DT the next series later. So it was like they had an opportunity to face off against Envy, and I really feel like they could have maybe done something. They could have maybe even won Season 2 after narrowly placing into the playoffs for that season as well. Because you got to imagine, they beat, like I said, they beat Envy at MLG Anaheim. They beat their hardest competition already in Optic. All you have to do is just beat DT and then be in the grand finals. But that seemed to be kind of like the story for their run was this particular tournament, because they could beat the top teams. They could compete against the top teams. When it came down to rosters who might be a little bit different, they might not know too much about certain rosters when they come up against them. They just weren't at their full potential. And some teams just match up really well against the best teams in the game. They really can. And maybe they play a little bit better because they know that they are the underdogs coming into that series. And it's sad, because if they could have transferred that to every team playing that consistent over a long period of time, StuDyy by far would have been in the top 5 players of the game. Nameless would have been looked at as a huge difference maker to this roster, which he was, but he definitely could have looked at that. And then you have the main sub duo, obviously, of SpaceLy and Saints, who were playing very well also. I mean, you got to give a lot of credit to SpaceLy, who's not really primarily known as a main slayer, but definitely kind of proved his point during this roster, or for this roster during this game. And Saints, who everyone knows is a very consistent slayer at his position as well. And then later on, heading into Call of Duty XP, they seem to be a very, very solid team if they played the right way, like I said. They ended up facing off fairly well in groups, but ran into Rise Nation fairly early on, which knocked them down to losers, and later fell to OG shortly after, knocking them out of the biggest tournament, obviously, in Call of Duty history. So you can't imagine it's a really... I think everyone kind of took Call of Duty Championships, which they should. They took Call of Duty Championships as, like, based on how we perform, that's dependent on how, like, that's dependent on how we're going to go into the next title, which to me is here or there. Titles can be obviously way different. Black Ops 3 to Infinite Warfare can be totally different games. I know for them, placing top 12 was not at all a prediction that many people had for them coming into that tournament. I mean, facing off against some of the best teams. Rise Nation always seemed to be a roster, no matter what the teams were, and Rise Nation always stayed consistent, but no matter what team LG was on, they always had a problem with them facing off in the regular season. They kind of went back and forth. I think at one point, Rise Nation had only lost to Optic, FaZe, and I think Envy, but LG was the only team to beat them out of those rosters. And then I believe at UMG South Carolina, those two teams met up in the grand finals of that tournament. Rise took them out again. So it's kind of like they've been going back and forth, but on land, Rise always seemed to get the better of them. But when it came down to other top teams, Optic Gaming, Envy included, LG always seemed to show up, and I wish that they could have transferred that to other things, but obviously a top 12 placing at COD Champs, not at all a good placing, not anything to write home about, but they all stated that they were going to be either free agents or they were going to try to form a team and look for one, but I believe later on it was noted and like put in streams and stuff that they weren't most likely going to be on the same team. Of course, if you guys have any thoughts on Luminosity Gaming, of course, these 3 players, where you think they could potentially go, will they try to team up? Probably not, according to what they've said, but what are your guys' thoughts on maybe the new Luminosity Gaming roster, of course, now being Classic, Octane, Slack, and Saints? And like I said, just put all your thoughts down in the comments. Your opinions are obviously very, very much appreciated. So yeah, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for future content. Thank you guys so much for watching yet again. That has been my thoughts on the Luminosity Gaming change that they ended up making. I'll see you guys later. Have a fantastic day, and until next time, peace.